If your feet are cold at 10 o'clock at night, even under a blanket, even in July, I want you to keep watching. You've probably been told to walk more. So you walk. A mile in the morning, maybe another lap after dinner, and your ankles still swell, your feet still feel like they belong to someone standing outside in the cold. You still get that unsteady, floaty feeling when you stand up too fast from the couch. Here's what almost nobody explains to you in a rushed 15-minute appointment. Walking barely touches the one mechanism that actually clears blood
of your lower legs. It's not your steps that matter most. It's one specific muscle, working in one specific way, that most people over 60 have quietly lost the ability to use properly. And once that muscle stops doing its job, the effects don't stay in your feet. Poor circulation in the legs is often one of the earliest signs that the blood vessels feeding your whole lower body are under strain. Left unaddressed, it can mean slower healing from small cuts and scrapes. In some cases, it can progress toward more serious complications. It's also closely tied to something else: your balance, your fall risk, and how steady you feel simply standing up. So today, I'm going to walk you through 5 specific movements. Not steps, not miles. 5 deliberate, controlled movements that reawaken the muscle your circulation actually depends on. I'll build from the gentlest one to the single most important one, the one physical therapy and vascular rehab programs rely on more than any other. Stay with me to the end, because that last one changes everything. I sat across from patients in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who were doing everything they thought was right and still not getting the results they expected. What I realized is that most health advice for this stage of life is either too vague to act on or too complicated to stick with. So this channel exists to close that gap. Every video breaks down one piece of what I'd call real health intelligence, the kind of practical, specific explanation your doctor would give you if they had an extra 20 minutes instead of 10. Before we get into today's movements, I'd love to know a little about who's watching. Drop your age in the comments and tell me what city or state you're watching from today. I read every single comment, and it genuinely shapes what I make next. If you're new here, welcome. You're in the right place. Now, let's talk about the muscle behind all of this. Your calf isn't just there to help you walk or push off the ground. It functions almost like a second pump for your blood, working alongside your heart. Picture the veins running up the back of your lower leg like a narrow staircase, with gravity constantly pulling blood back down it. Every time your calf muscle contracts, it presses against those deep veins and forces a wave of blood upward toward your chest. Small one-way valves inside those veins close behind that wave, so the blood can't slide back down. Contract, push, seal. Contract, push, seal. That's the entire mechanism. And when it's working well, it works beautifully. The trouble is what happens to it after 60. Vein walls can lose some of their firmness over the decades and begin to stretch. Those tiny valves can start to leak, and the calf muscle itself often shrinks and weakens, especially for anyone spending a large part of the day sitting, which describes most people's daily routine, whether they realize it or not. When that happens, the pump slows. Blood lingers near the ankle instead of climbing back up. Swelling creeps in by evening. Feet run cold. And because moving starts to feel harder or less comfortable, people naturally do less of it, which weakens the pump even further. It becomes a quiet, slow-moving cycle. And a lot of people are somewhere inside it without ever connecting the dots. The good news is that this cycle runs just as easily in reverse. It doesn't require more walking. It requires deliberately switching that pump back on, several times a day, in ways that walking alone rarely accomplishes. That's exactly what these 5 movements are built to do. Movement 5, the foot rock. This is the gentlest place to begin, and for good reason. It's often the very first movement given to patients recovering from surgery, before they're even cleared to stand, precisely because it keeps blood from pooling while the body heals. Most people default to walking because it feels like the obvious active thing to do. But walking relies on momentum. You fall slightly forward and catch yourself, over and over, and your calf barely completes a full contraction in the process. Here's what's happening inside your leg when you do a foot rock instead. Sitting with your feet flat on the floor, you lift your toes toward your shins while your heels stay planted. Then reverse it, pressing the toes down and lifting the heels, like slowly easing onto a gas pedal. That motion forces your calf into a genuine, complete squeeze, something a normal stride rarely achieves. Left unaddressed, the swelling and cold feet that come from a sluggish pump can gradually worsen, particularly for anyone who spends long stretches of the day in a chair or a car seat. Here's the practical version. Sit with feet flat on the floor, rock through toes up and heels up slowly, 20 to 30 repetitions, 2 or 3 times through the day. Do it while the kettle boils, while you're on a phone call, while the news is on. It costs you nothing, and it asks nothing of your balance or your joints. Once that pump is switched on, we move up the leg to bigger muscles that can move even more blood. Movement 4. The extended sit lift. People tend to skip strength work for the thighs because it doesn't feel like it has anything to do with circulation. It looks like exercise for strength, not blood flow. But the two are far more connected than most people assume. When you straighten your leg and hold it, you engage the large muscles across the front of the thigh and hip, the same muscles responsible for standing up from a chair, climbing stairs, and catching yourself if you start to stumble. As they contract, they press on the larger veins running through the thigh and help push blood further along its path back to the heart. Neglecting this muscle group doesn't just affect circulation. Clinicians often pay close attention to how quickly someone walks because a slowing gait can be one of the earliest quiet signals that overall strength and mobility are beginning to decline. Strengthening these muscles is a direct way to push back against that pattern. Here's how to do it. Sit tall in a sturdy chair, back pressed firmly against the seat, feet flat on the floor. Slowly straighten one leg out in front of you, hold for a couple of seconds, then lower it with control rather than letting it drop. 10 to 15 repetitions per leg. Keep your back against the chair the entire time. That's what stops you from using momentum instead of muscle. As it becomes easier, a light ankle weight or resistance band adds meaningful benefit. Even a pound or two makes a real difference for most people. This movement builds real strength through the thigh and hip. But circulation and balance depend on each other, and that's where we go next. Movement 3. The counter-braced raise. This is where circulation training and balance training start to overlap directly, and it's a step a lot of people underestimate simply because it looks like a basic calf raise. Standing behind a sturdy chair or at the kitchen counter, hands resting lightly for support, feet hip-width apart. Rise slowly onto the balls of your feet. Pause at the top for 2 to 3 seconds. Eyes forward rather than down at your feet. Then lower over a full 3 seconds. That pause at the top is what most people leave out, and it's exactly where the benefit comes from. It trains the calf and the balance system to fire together, which is precisely what your body needs in the split second it catches you from an unexpected stumble. Weak calves don't just mean pooling blood and swelling. They're also tied to slower balance reactions, which means an ordinary trip is more likely to turn into an actual fall. Maintaining strength through the lower legs is widely regarded, including by organizations focused on healthy aging, as one of the more reliable ways to preserve everyday independence, getting off the couch, climbing stairs, and standing from a chair without needing a hand. 10 repetitions to start, building toward 20 or 25 over several weeks. For many people, this is the movement that first makes them feel noticeably steadier on their feet. Standing on 2 feet, though, is the easier version of this challenge. The next movement takes one of them away. Movement 2, the one-leg hold. Most people dismiss single-leg balance work as something separate from circulation, a balance drill, nothing more. But the connection between the two is stronger than it looks. The moment you shift your full weight onto one leg, your calf, ankle, hip, and core all have to contract continuously just to keep you upright. That sustained contraction keeps the calf pump actively working for the entire hold, something a normal walking stride, where each foot only briefly bears weight, never asks of the muscle. Researchers studying this kind of simple balance test in older adults have generally found that the ability to hold a steady single-leg stance is linked to broader measures of long-term health, and a fair number of people in their 70s find it harder than expected the first time they try. You can test a light version of this right now, carefully, near a counter or chair. Stand tall, one hand close to something to grab, and lift one foot an inch or two off the floor. Notice how steady or unsteady that feels. To train it properly, rest one hand lightly on a counter or wall, shift your weight onto one leg, lift the other foot slightly, keep your eyes forward, and avoid curling your toes to grip the floor. Hold for 20 to 30 seconds, breathing normally, then switch sides. 2 rounds per side to start. As it becomes easier, let your hand hover just above the surface instead of resting on it. This is where circulation and fall prevention completely intersect. When balance weakens, people naturally move less. When movement drops, the pump slows further, swelling increases, and confidence quietly erodes, which is the very cycle we started with. Training this movement pushes directly against that pattern. But sustained balance alone isn't quite the strongest version of the pump. For that, there's one movement left. Before we get to the most important movement of the 5, if this has been useful so far, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps more people my age group find this information, and it costs you nothing. Now, back to your legs. The standing hold. This is the movement I'd choose without hesitation if I could only give you one. It looks almost identical to the counter-braced raise, with a single change that makes an enormous difference: the length of the hold at the top. Most people default to short, quick calf raises, if they do any at all, because that's how the movement is usually demonstrated. A quick up and down. But a brief pulse barely gives the pump time to fully engage before it releases again. It's the equivalent of squeezing a sponge for a fraction of a second and expecting it to fully wring out. Here's what's actually happening inside your leg during a longer hold. As you rise onto the balls of your feet and stay there, your calf muscle stays fully contracted, which means the deep veins beneath it stay compressed for several full seconds rather than releasing immediately. That extended compression is what allows blood that's been stalling near your ankle to actually clear out and travel upward, rather than just getting a brief nudge before settling right back down. Left unaddressed, that stalling blood is part of what drives the swelling, the aching, and the persistent cold feet that so many people assume are simply an unavoidable part of getting older. They're not. They're a sign the pump isn't being asked to do its full job. This is also precisely why vascular rehabilitation programs around the world build their circulation protocols around exactly this kind of extended calf raise hold, rather than around walking programs alone. Research examining structured calf raise programs in people with circulation difficulty has generally shown meaningful improvements in comfortable walking distance over time, without any medication or equipment involved. Here's exactly how to do it safely. Stand behind a sturdy chair or at a kitchen counter, hands resting there lightly for balance, feet about hip-width apart. Rise slowly onto the balls of your feet, lifting your heels as high as feels comfortable. Now, instead of lowering right away, hold that position for 3 to 5 full seconds. Breathe normally throughout. Don't hold your breath. Keep your eyes forward rather than looking down. Then lower yourself slowly, taking a full 3 seconds to come back down. That's 1 repetition. Start with 8 to 10 repetitions. Over the coming weeks, work up toward 15 or 20, always moving with control rather than rushing through them. The hold is the entire point of this movement. Everything else about it is identical to a standard calf raise, and the hold is what changes the result. Because there's no jumping and no impact anywhere in this movement, it tends to remain accessible even for people managing arthritis or shaky balance, provided one hand stays on that counter the entire time. Before we wrap up, one important note. If you ever experience sudden severe pain in one leg, or notice a leg turning pale, cold, or numb without any clear explanation, or a sore on the foot or ankle that simply won't heal, please don't try to work through that with exercises at home. Have it looked at promptly. That kind of symptom can signal a seriously blocked artery, and it needs urgent attention. Everything covered in this video is intended for gradual, everyday circulation support, not for a sudden medical emergency. Let me bring this back to Walter, a composite of quite a few patients I've cared for over the years, so no single person's story is being told here. Walter was 73, still golfing on weekends, still sharp, still picking his grandkids up from school. But by 6 every evening, his socks left deep grooves in his ankles, and his feet felt like ice packs by bedtime, even in the middle of summer. He'd been walking faithfully for 3 years and couldn't understand why it wasn't helping. I had him set aside his obsession with step count and instead spend about 12 minutes a day moving through these 5 movements, in order. Foot rocks with his morning coffee. Sit lifts during a commercial break. Counter raises while brushing his teeth. The one-leg hold before bed. And the standing hold to finish. I won't pretend his circulation transformed overnight, because it didn't, and I'd never promise you that. But within a few weeks, his ankles weren't ballooning by dinner. His feet were warmer at night. And the thing he mentioned most was that he stopped feeling unsteady climbing out of his recliner. He felt solid on his feet again. If there's one small change to take from this video, let it be this. Don't add more walking to your day. Add these 5 minutes of deliberate movement instead. Your circulation, more than most things about getting older, is genuinely something you have a say in. If this video helped you, I'd love it if you'd take a moment to like it, subscribe so the next one finds its way to you, and leave a comment telling me which of these 5 movements you're starting with today. Share it with anyone in your life who's been told to just walk more and is still waiting to feel the difference. Take care of those legs. They've carried you this far, and a few honest minutes a day will help them carry you a lot further. I'll see you in the next one.